dedicated to my great-aunt Io, the source of the swarm. Beware the Bohrok. Book 2 of the revised Bionicle series. Written by Isaac Minor. Based on the original LEGO Bionicle story by Alastair Swinnerton, Bob Thompson, Martin Anderson, Christian Faber, Greg Farshti, and Catherine Hapka. Narrated by Isaac Minor. Featuring a full cast of actors. Prologue. Morning in the Jungle. The early morning sunlight slipped through the gaps of the leaves, gently swaying in the treetops above the marshes of Lewahi, producing a gentle dance of luminous rays that revealed the lively atmosphere created by the hundreds of species of biomechanical creatures that resided within the region. The songs of birds, bugs, and other living things, accompanied by rustling branches and splashing water, generated an orchestra of vibrant sound that the local villagers had grown to find ordinary, but no less pleasant than when they first arrived. More than a mile from his home village, Kongu sat inconspicuously among the other forms of life that populated the area. He rested on a sturdy branch roughly 20 feet above the soggy ground overlooking the swamp. He had one foot propped on the branch while the other dangled freely over the side. In the 2 weeks since the liberation of the infected Rahi, he had begun to venture beyond the safety of Likoro much more frequently, finally allowed to appreciate the natural beauty of the island with a still present, yet significantly lower risk of getting eaten alive along the way. The scenery was strikingly beautiful, yet his spirit remained somber. The image of the light slipping away from Ka's eye, punctuating the end of his labored breaths, was a memory that seemed to be burned into the forefront of his mind. His beloved bird was more than a mere pet. He was a fellow warrior that carried him through countless battles against Makuta's forces up to the very end, proving his unwavering loyalty when he traded his own life to save his master. In the end, the battle was won thanks to the Toa, but it came at a great cost. Since then, it seemed the Limatoran had done nothing but celebrate and sing of their victory, something that was entirely expected of them, which only drove Kongu to further isolate himself. He wasn't upset at their merriment, however. The long and hard-fought war finally brought to an end, ushering a time of peace never before seen on the island was perhaps the most worthy cause for celebration to ever exist. But it certainly prevented him from properly grieving, which is why he chose to keep his distance for a while.
"Did the Raga send you out to hunt find me?"
Kongu asked, without taking his eyes away from the swamp.
"What?"
exclaimed a voice from below.
"How'd you sense know I was even here?"
"Ground bounding has betrayed you, Tamaru. It's never been our friend."
Tamaru emerged from the ground-level greenery into the soggy clearing, only just becoming totally conscious of the volume of his squishing footsteps.
He said with a shrug. "They should keep stick to vein swinging."
Kongu glanced down at Tamaru, finding the piercing amber eyes behind his lime-green noble Kanohi Rao to express thinly veiled concern as he looked up toward his old friend.
And to answer your question, no he didn't. I was heart worried about you, as is he, but I track sought you on my own.
Kongu gave a deep sigh before swinging himself off the branch. He caught the trunk of the tree and climbed down in a display of grace and speed that anyone outside of Likoro would have thought to be impossible. He would have been content to remain on the branch for a while longer, but he felt Tamaru deserved to be addressed on an equal level.
"I'm all right, Tamaru,"
he said.
"Just deep feeling a bit down."
"I know. You haven't been yourself since the Kini battle. None of us like view seeing you like this."
"That's why I come out here. So no one has to view see me like this. I don't want to pull the whole village down with me.
You shouldn't have to grieve mourn alone. We Leaf Brothers have clean stuck together through it all, not just the happy good times.
A slight smile formed behind Kongu's mask before he placed a hand over Tamaru's shoulder.
You're a true good friend, Tamaru.
As are you, Kongu. Which is why I was hard-pressed to check on you. So, will you go back Topleaf with me?
Perhaps later. There's 100 years of time catching up to do out here.
Well, do you mind bother some company then?
Kongu didn't respond. His expression instantly shifted to one of curious suspicion as his focus was pulled from the conversation. His eyes narrowed as they scanned their surroundings.
Kongu?
Tamaru asked.
Do you smell that?
Kongu replied. Only then did Tamaru notice the scent slowly thickening in the air.
Smoke,
he responded.
Where's it coming from?
We aren't expecting a drop visit from To'otahu, are we?
Not to my lore knowledge,
Tamaru replied as they both noticed the visible haze beginning to pollute the air. Kongu stepped forward to get a clearer view of the sky from between the treetops, where he caught a glimpse of a billowing cloud of blackness rolling up roughly a mile in the distance.
The village!
He shouted, sprinting forward toward the source of the fire.
Tamaru, hurry!
Tamaru followed closely behind as the two Lee Matoran bolted toward the trees. They scaled the nearest trees along the way, swiftly transferring their charge away from the marshy ground. They leaped from tree to tree, weaving effortlessly over and around every branch until they reached a cluster of hanging vines to hasten their pursuit. The veil of smoke continued to thicken until they could barely see the vines they reached for. As they neared their destination, their vision was reduced to nothing but vague outlines and a persistent orange glow of spreading flames overhead. Within minutes, they reached the outskirts of the village, fighting through the choking smog. Looking up, the farthest volo tree making up the foundation of their village was engulfed in fire, which had already begun to spread into the leaves of its tightly knit neighbors.
They won't be able to see us through the smoke.
Kongu coughed through the overpowering sound of crackling flames and buckling trunks.
We'll have to hurry, find another way up.
Up?
Tamaru questioned, hacking and coughing through every word.
We can't rush go up there. That's where the fire is.
That's also where the Raga is. And everyone else we call Leaf Brother. I'm not death losing any more friends. We need to get up there before it's too late.
Tamaru hesitated. Foolhardy heroics were always a staple of Kongu's personality. It's what made him the perfect Gakko Force captain. But despite considering him a close friend, he was nothing like Kongu. In fact, he was perhaps the only Lee Matoran in history to be terrified of heights, especially when fire and low visibility were involved. But Kongu was right, and he refused to be the reason his friends perished in a blazing inferno. Still fighting through the smoke, he stiffened up, giving a brief and reluctant nod.
Good, fine. Lead point the way.
Kongu searched for the quickest way to the top of the trees, struggling to make out even the most obvious details. His search was interrupted by a deafening crackle coming from up ahead. They looked up to see one of the volo trees had completely burned through. Losing the battle against its own weight, the top of the towering tree broke, snapping away the interconnecting rope bridges as it brought a considerable chunk of the village with it. The branches snagged against every nearby tree on its way down, sharing the flames that led to its fall before plummeting down to the edge of the swamp below.
Kongu, watch out!
Part 1. The Arrival. Chapter 1. Rumble Down Under.
I think it's finished,
Toa Onua said proudly.
Great work, everyone. I wouldn't have even known where to begin without your help.
The Toa of Earth stood alongside Toa Lewa among a small crew of Onumatoran workers admiring the newly constructed dwelling that stood cozily on the western outskirts of Onukoro. He reasoned that if he and the other Toa were now taking permanent residence on the island of Matanui, he would need a place of his own. Upon hearing this, the Onumatoran jumped at the chance to help the Toa achieve this plan, gathering their best and most specialized workers for the job. Onua initially requested nothing more than a simple hut that would provide him a place to rest without having to duck his head whenever he entered it. But the Matoran insisted the legendary Toa of Earth deserved something far greater, and so their architects got to work designing a home. Members of the trading guild provided the most high-quality lumber from Liwahi, transported straight through their recently completed highway system, which ultimately caught the attention of Toa Lewa, who decided to help with the project. Neither Onua nor Lewa knew the first thing about construction, but between the small crew of highly skilled and experienced Onumatoran builders and the two giant Toa to aid with all of the heavy lifting, the home was completed in under 2 weeks. The final result was an impressively sized cabin, built firmly into the earth, beside a small underground lake, fed by a trickling waterfall sprouting out of the cavernous walls streaming down the rocky hill beside the house. The massive doorway and high walls were built to accommodate Onua's 7-foot frame, and extra rooms were included for the other Toa should they ever pass through Onukoro during their travels.
"It was our pleasure, Toa,"
said Akamu, the Matoran overseer of the project.
"Your strength was a game changer. I wish we had you around for every project."
That's not a bad idea, actually.
Onua replied.
I wouldn't mind helping out on other job sites.
Really? Surely you have more important things to worry about than helping us.
Like what? Things have settled down on the island, and while I'm unsure how long that will last, I'd like to keep busy in the meantime. I've even been considering volunteering in the mines from time to time.
If you joined the miners, there wouldn't be any work left for the rest of them,
said one of the other Matoran.
I don't know, Toa Onua,
Akamu said.
It just feels like we'd be disrespecting you by taking advantage of your abilities.
My purpose is to help Matoran or Matanui, is it not? I believe this falls into that category. Besides, I enjoy this. I look forward to doing it again.
What about you, Toa Lewa?
Asked one of the other Matoran.
What will you do now that the island's at peace?
I'm not sure certain,
Toa Lewa replied.
I haven't even planned how I'm time spending the rest of today.
Well, you're welcome to stay in Onukoro for as long as you like, of course,
said Onua.
Many thanks. But I may just be wind flying back to Lokoro. All this build work has built up an ever-strong appetite.
All the more reason to stay,
said Akamu.
Zemia told me this morning that he just received a good selection of meat from Kauai. He may even have some crystal climber steaks. We'd be honored to prepare a meal for the Toa.
Crystal climber?
Onua asked. Akamu scratched his brainstalk.
Right. It's easy to forget you haven't been here very long. You gotta try it, though. It's delicious.
Onua looked over toward Lewa for his response. The Toa of Air shrugged.
I guess I got nowhere else to be. Let's try it.
Akamu clasped his clawed hands together.
Wonderful! Now then, I'll need to make a quick run to the markets.
Just as Akamu turned toward the main village, his balance was disrupted by a sudden tremor. He stumbled forward before quickly regaining his balance. The rest of the company planted their feet as the quaking persisted.
Whatever was that?
Lewa asked.
It's just a little earthquake,
Akamu replied dismissively, still holding a widened stance.
We get them on occasion. It'll pass in a moment.
Onua's expression displayed a mix of curiosity and skepticism. He stooped down and pressed his oversized hand flat against the rumbling floor. He closed his eyes, concentrating on the vibrations.
This isn't a natural earthquake,
he said, tapping into his connection with the earth to study its disturbance.
It's too rhythmic, focused. There's something directly beneath us that's causing it.
The tremor shifted away from beneath their feet, moving toward the direction of the village. Onua followed its path, running his palm along the ground as he probed for more clarity.
Watch your step.
Onua continued.
Whatever it is, its tunneling is weakening the foundation.
Lewa looked down, lightly tapping his foot against the earth. Just as Onua had stated, the ground felt hollow. The surrounding Matoran carefully selected their footing as to not fall through the now brittle ground. Glancing around, they noticed nearby sections of the area began to quake as well. Onua dug his claws into the ground, channeling his power into the dirt to impede the unknown culprit's progress toward the village. The tunneling ceased, allowing him to focus on filling the hollowed sections before further damage could be caused. As he did so, he could feel the vibrations of the agitated creature beneath his feet. Onua pulled back as a dirt-coated appendage burst from the ground, swiping toward the Toa. Taking a step back, Onua instinctively raised his claws in defense as he watched the creature emerge. Its bizarre and absurd appearance was far different than any Rahi Onua had familiarized himself with. Once it had fully surfaced, the Matoran-sized creature stood upright in a bow-legged stance. Its black, heavily armored body and head were rounded, separated by a stick-like neck that only became visible as it pecked toward the Toa. A thin and closely pressed pair of fangs hung from its face, and while the creature had no lower jaw, a bottom pair of teeth protruded from its upper chest, only vaguely resembling a proper mouth. In place of hands, it bore oversized half-saucers, each presenting a pair of chisels, while a third pair of twitching limbs possessing curled hooks was tucked close to its body.
What is that thing?
Akamu exclaimed. Onua glanced back at the Matoran in surprise.
I was hoping you knew.
Well, it doesn't look too glad happy to see you, Nua,
Lewa remarked. Onua stepped forward, provoking the creature further. It pounced forward, slamming its head plate into the Toa's chest and knocking him to the ground. Onua threw up his claws, blocking a hail of strikes from the chisels on its hand shields. He quickly secured a grip on its body and tossed it away. The creature tucked itself into a near-perfect sphere, softening its landing as it rolled across the ground before unfolding again to continue the fight, this time focusing on the Matoran workers. Lewa charged forward, bringing the blade of his axe down onto its head. The blade bounced off with no effect, but still drew the creature's attention away from the Matoran. Lewa followed with a relentless blast of wind from the tip of his axe before the creature had the chance to pounce again. The creature tumbled backward, landing beside Onua's feet, allowing him to finish it off with a well-placed fist. The creature's limbs stiffened as the light of its eyes flickered. The Matoran huddled around the wrecked carcass, leaning in for a closer look.
I've never seen anything like this before,
said Akamu.
What's that thing inside its head plate?
Asked another Matoran.
Some kind of brain stalk?
I thought the Rama were bad ugly,
Lewa added, resting his axe over his shoulder.
This is a whole nother tier level.
The Turaga needs to see this.
The ground continued to quake as Onua could feel the vibrations of other tunnels forming around them. Sections of the floor began to cave inward, while cracks formed along the terrain. Glancing up, Onua watched the foundations of his newly constructed home give way, causing it to buckle. The frame of the house cracked and splintered, slowly sliding until the entire structure folded in on itself before dropping into the open ground, sending out a shockwave of dust as the tunneling continued. Following the Toa's orders, the Matoran work crew rushed off toward their homes, while Onua and Lewa stood their ground. The quaking grew more pervasive as the Toa readied themselves. Onua stabbed his claws into the ground, manipulating the soil and causing the earthquake to amplify. Seconds passed before more creatures burst from the ground, all of which almost completely identical to the first. One by one they sprouted, until more than 2 or 3 dozen of the strange creatures stood facing the Toa.
He brought friends.
Lewa said as he gripped the handle of his axe. The two Toa rushed forward, engaging in battle with the drove of mysterious creatures. With the aid of his Kanohi Miru, Lewa launched himself into the air, performing a polished flip before landing into a roll beside his first target, sweeping out its legs before springing back to his feet. He spun toward a second creature advancing on him, blasting it away with a gust of wind before turning back to finish off the first. Onua activated his Kanohi Pakari before snatching up the nearest creature and chucking it into another nearby foe. A third beast thrust its head forward, aiming for the Toa's chest. Onua sidestepped, following up by caving its plated head into the ground with a downward fist. Two more creatures came at him from either side. He dodged their strikes before scooping them up by their necks and slamming their heads together, generating a sharp crunch of metal as their bodies instantly slacked. Lewa swung his axe toward the nearest creature, only for it to block the blade with its rounded hand shield. He swung a second and third time, both strikes being blocked again before landing a killing blow with the fourth. Locking onto the next target, Lewa feinted with an overhead strike of his axe before breaking its defense with a solid kick, allowing him to neutralize it with a true attack. Turning toward an advancing group, the Toa generated a hurricane blast from the end of his weapon, knocking them off their clawed feet. With his Kanohi still powered, Onua swiped his claws toward one of the creatures, only for it to swiftly dodge the attack. The creature folded into a ball before rolling around Onua's legs and springing back open. The creature leaped onto his back, scratching and biting against his armor. These attacks did little to harm the Toa, until the creature used the chisels of its shield to puncture the organic muscle between the gaps of his armor. Onua cried out in pain as he felt the chisels stabbing into his back. He reached back and secured a grip on the creature's leg, yanking it onto the ground before stomping down onto its skull. Feeling his energy waning, Onua deactivated his mask before continuing the fight. Lewa found himself locked in a bind against one of the invaders as it fought to hold back the Toa's axe blade. Distracted by the struggle, Lewa failed to notice the second creature sneak behind him. It slammed its head into the bend of his leg, forcing him onto the ground. He swatted the creature back with the knob of his axe, creating enough space to roll away from the first creature's attack. As the two creatures moved closer, Onua rushed to Lewa's aid, wrestling the first creature to the ground. Now able to put his full focus on the second enemy, Lewa tapped his feet as he waited for the creature to strike again. Lewa weaved around its body as it thrust its head forward a second time, allowing him to chop through its briefly exposed neck. Seconds later, Onua climbed back to his feet, discarding the twitching body of the first creature. The two Toa stood beside each other, eyeing the advancing cluster of creatures, nearly 20 of which still remained.
So, any thought plans?
Lewa asked. Onua watched as they began to slow their charge, until they stopped pressing forward completely. They stood motionless, waiting for the Toa to make the next move. He also noticed the ones near the back of the crowd had even begun to turn away, almost as though they had lost interest in the fight altogether. Onua considered simply letting them flee, until it became clear their attention was shifting back toward their intended target, the village.
One has come to mind,
Onua replied, jabbing his claws into the cavern floor.
Use your mask, don't let your feet touch the ground, and remember, the underside of their armor seems to be their weakest point.
Without question, Lewa readied his axe before activating his Kanohi. Just as his feet departed from the ground, Onua channeled his elemental energy into the earth, causing a violent tremor to rattle the battleground. The remaining creatures fought to maintain their balance, able to do little more than anchor their claws into the rumbling terrain. Lewa seized the opportunity, hovering toward the nearest of the creatures. With a solid swing, he quickly dispatched it before moving on to the next target. He repeated this maneuver until he had removed 6 more of the creatures from the fight, all while Onua maintained his concentration on generating the earthquake. He aimed for a 7th, but was caught by surprise when the creature successfully dodged his attack before countering with a strike of his own. Thrusting its head forward, it hooked its fangs onto Lewa's foot, and with a swift whip of its neck, tossed the Toa onto the shaking ground. Onua ceased the earthquake before rushing to Lewa's aid, only to be halted by 3 more of the creatures blocking his path. Lewa rolled onto his back, kicking the creature away before springing to his feet. It lunged toward him, only for its upper jaw to be greeted by the blade of his axe. He spun around, seeking out his next target. Soon after, Onua had reached his position. Together, they fought to eliminate the remaining creatures. With hundreds of claws, kicks, hacks, punches, and elemental attacks, the 2 Toa were left standing breathlessly amidst a scattered mess of wrecked and mangled bodies, many of which still twitched and sputtered.
I trust think that's the last of them.
Lewa panted, returning his axe to his back.
Nice work,
Onua said, glancing back toward the village, noticing a small crowd of onlookers begin to form outside of their homes.
It's a good thing you were here.
The 2 Toa turned their attention towards the heaping mound of broken rubble where Onua's new home once stood.
Well,
Lewa began, hoping to make light of the situation.
You did say you looked forward to set building again. You'll know where to call find me when the time comes.
Thanks,
said Onua.
but we'll have to worry about that later. We need to speak to the Turaga. I have a feeling this attack could be the start of something far worse.
I'm already here,
called a familiar voice. The Toa turned to see Turaga Whenua approaching the scene. Walking by his side was Captain Onepu.
Akamu told me what happened. Was anyone injured?
Thankfully, no,
Onua replied.
We were all clear when the house collapsed. But these strange Rahi are to blame. Lewa and I stopped them from reaching the village.
I see,
Whenua muttered as he stooped down to inspect one of the dead creatures. He carefully studied every angle of the peculiar body, using his staff to lift its lifeless head for a closer look. Onepu stooped beside another, though his curious expression appeared closer to the ones the building crew wore rather than the Turaga's.
I've never seen anything quite like it,
said Onepu.
Is it an insect? Crustacean? Flightless bird? I'm unsure. Very strange indeed.
The building crew said the same thing,
Lewa replied.
No one seems to recognize them.
I do,
the Turaga replied, pulling himself off the ground by his drill staff.
I am familiar with these creatures, though my knowledge of them is severely limited.
What are they?
Onua asked.
Bohrok,
the Turaga replied grimly.
And they are no ordinary Rahi beasts, existing for no other purpose than to destroy. This is a terribly serious situation.
Will there be more? And if so, how do we stop them?
I'm afraid that this is beyond the extent of my knowledge. I will seek out these answers, but in the meantime, you must gather the other Toa. I fear this could extend beyond our Wahi.
Understood, Turaga,
Onua said.
Once you've collected the others, I will meet you all in Takoro once I found the answers I seek, so that you may adequately prepare for what may lie ahead. Until then, proceed with both haste and caution.
Where will you find this key knowledge?
Lewa asked.
That's not for you to concern yourself with,
Whenua replied in an oddly defensive tone.
Trust I find what I seek, and I will aid you once I am able.
With that, the Turaga motioned for Captain Onepu to follow him as he headed back toward the village. The captain sprung to his feet, stopping to salute the Toa before departing.
I suggest we start in Pokoro,
Onua said, turning to Lewa.
You and I can loop through the northeastern sections of the island and gather the others along the way. I'm sure Pohatu would be happy to make the detour in Kauai.
Good, fine,
Lewa said hesitantly, scratching his brainstalk.
What is it?
I don't feel right leaving without well checking the Koro first. With as dark serious as the Raga made it harsh sound, I'll have to meet you in Tokoro.
You want to split up?
I'm sure they're right fine, but I prefer to know for true certain.
I understand.
Onua said with a nod.
They're the only ones without a Toa at the moment. I would feel the same way.
Thank you, Nua.
Lewa said, clanking his fist against Onua's in a friendly salute.
I'll then fly straight to Tokoro once I know they're safe. Heart promise.
Good luck, Lewa. I'll see you there.